marijuana to be legalized to one aspect or another. Today we are going to be hearing from the non-advocates. First on the agenda we have Dr. Eric Voth. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Dr. Eric Voth. I serve as the chairman of the Institute on Global Drug Policy, which is an international drug policy think tank. I'm also here representing the views of the Kansas Medical Society today. I have been a practicing internal medicine, pain, and addiction specialist for 30 years. And for over 30 years, I've been involved opposing legalization of marijuana, medical marijuana, etc. I want to make a couple of summary points to the gallery and to the committee. First of all, marijuana is a serious public health threat. It is not a harmless substance, and it's irresponsible to suggest that it's essentially a meaningless or a simple recreational drug. Second, to try to pass some sort of legislation that allows medical access is a terrible medical precedent. It bypasses the FDA, and it essentially creates medicine by popular vote. Third, there is not one medical indication, not one medical disorder where marijuana is the only option nor superior to existing drugs. And for even some of the heart-wrenching testimony you heard yesterday, there are investigational new drug trials available to try to address some of these problems. I want to talk about marijuana first as a problem drug, and you've got to understand that one of the core issues is that it's highly impure. There are now over 500 substances that have been identified out of marijuana itself. The problem also arises in the THC concentrations. The major active ingredient are widely variable, anywhere from an average now on the street of about 12% THC to 20 or 30% with some of the hybrid variants, and 80% or so with some of the hash oil variants. So there's anywhere from very low available to literally toxic and psychiatric inducing levels. I'm going to have to, because of time, summarize some of the particular problems associated with marijuana, and I'm basing these on the most recent literature, and everything that I say is in the medical literature and can be validated. First of all, one of the core issues with marijuana use is its cognitive and mental problems. It's associated with attention difficulties, concentration, decision making.
Excuse me, Dr. Rose. I just want to point out to the committee members that they can follow along.
I put this in a PowerPoint form so that it's a little easier to follow. It's a lot of data in a short period of time.
Thank you.
Inhibition of learning ability, impulsivity, working memory difficulties, verbal fluency, and concept formation. There is now solid evidence, solid structural MRI evidence that marijuana use, chronically of course, actually changes brain structure and creates structural damage to the brain. There's clear evidence of poor life outcomes, difficulty with high school completion, degree attainment. There's neuropsychological decline where IQ over time actually falls anywhere from 6 to 10%. Brand new studies looking at large PTSD populations have demonstrated worse outcomes with the PTSD sufferers that smoke marijuana, and the ones that have been new to marijuana have actually increased violence levels. Additionally, sexual assault and victimization is clearly shown to predict domestic violence, dating violence, partner aggression, college partner violence, and a whole host of interpersonal violence episodes. From the psychiatric realm, it's clearly associated with causing depression, psychotic episodes, and I'll tell you, I've personally treated at least 10 psychotic episodes induced by nothing more than marijuana, and last Friday literally treated one that had just come back from Colorado, out there using pot, went psychotic, came home, and had to be treated. It's known to induce bipolar illness, it's known to induce psychotic episodes and schizophrenics, and there's a solid science background clearly identifying this. There are evidence now that there are newborn effects. Obviously, many young women smoke it, and many smoke it during pregnancy. responsible for reductions in birth weight, length, head circumference, developmental abnormalities, etc. I want to be quite clear that the whole medical marijuana movement has been identified by the movement itself as a way for the camel to get its nose under the tent for legalization. The scientific status of marijuana as it stands today, with numerous organizations taking formal positions regarding the use of marijuana for medicine, is that the individual cannabinoids may have some use, smoking is problematic, legislative processes are not the way to deal with it because it bypasses the FDA. There are already cannabinoids available, such as Marinol. There's another one called Sativex that is coming hopefully soon, and there are investigational drug trials going on with the Charlotte's Web equivalent, which is called Epidiolex. And I would point out there that in those trials, they've only shown that about a third of the kids that were submitted to them had some, not all, but some benefit. Again, scientific, medical, research-based study. I want to further point out that there is a negative effect of these medical marijuana movements. Even though the second studies that are shown on these slides are not in color, there is clear evidence that the medical marijuana states have higher adolescent use of marijuana than the non-medical marijuana states. It's clearly defined. And in Colorado, which is now our test neighbor, a real petri dish sitting there, the use of marijuana among kids 12 and older is 72% higher than the average of the rest of the country. We've seen in California and in Colorado fatal marijuana crashes going up. They've doubled in California from the time that medical marijuana became available in dispensaries. They've doubled in Colorado from the time medical marijuana was adopted to about 2011. That doesn't yet reflect the legalization in Colorado. Those are still intermediate numbers, and we don't know what the net effect is. There's evidence in Denver that some elements of crime, personal crime, property crime, have risen, and all offenses are up. And one of the most worrisome areas is childhood poisonings, where Colorado went from 0 to literally about 1 a week for some period of time, and places like Denver General have experienced huge increases in childhood THC poisonings, largely because of the edibles. The little gummy bears, for instance, which many of us would pop 4 or 5 at a time in our mouths, are intended to get 4 to 6 people stoned at a time. And yet, what do kids do? Same way with cookies that are maybe meant to be cut in 4ths or 6ths. How many of us can eat 1 cookie? So edibles have created a gigantic problem. And fundamental to this medical marijuana issue is who is actually using the marijuana for medicinal purposes. If you look at the age breakdown, 84% of the people using it in most of the states are under 54 years of age for pain. Under 54 years of age. Yet the pain literature would be the exact opposite of that, where most chronic pain sufferers are over 50. Clearly there's evidence of young people abusing marijuana, using pain as a simple excuse to gain. I'd like to summarize the medical literature as it relates to the use of marijuana for pain. First of all, the studies done on marijuana have also included THC alone, so it's kind of a mixed bag. It's not only the smoke pot, but it's also the prescribable Marinol, etc. Most of the studies have found that it's not a good individual substance for pain. It may have some additional add-on benefit for nerve-related pain. It is not good as a solo agent. The second thing that's been found is these massive doses, as you would find on the street, appear to not be necessary. One study even found some benefit for nerve pain down to 1.3% THC. Again, not the 15, 20, 30% THC as you see on the street. That's where systematic research needs to take place to look at exactly how much THC is necessary for an individual application. A couple of worrisome points. In HIV patients that have used it, there has been found a clear cognitive decline. So worse mental functioning, and in multiple sclerosis patients that have used it, there's been found a clear cognitive decline. So practical issues remain. If you do then allow medical marijuana, what do you allow? Street pot? Do you allow some specific percentage of THC? Who's going to grow it? Is it only going to be provided by the tobacco manufacturers? Will they have to be approved? And I will tell you also, having studied your legislation very carefully, you can drive trucks through it. So I'm very concerned that what we don't want to do is set a bad precedent, having medicine, or calling marijuana medicine and creating a medicine by popular vote phenomenon with a drug that is a public health risk, a seriously harmful drug, by no means a simple recreational drug. And we need to stick to FDA processes for getting medicines to market. And with that, I'd be open for questions.
Okay, committee, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. This would only be for committee members.
I wasn't going to ask a question, Madam Chair. I was going to ask you if I could hand this to the clerk.
Please wait until the
Yes.
committee is over. Are there any questions? Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Voth, for being here today. As you know, I've studied and read many of your findings over the course of several years. Appreciate your seeming concern to address this issue. My question, I guess, is, as you have so correctly stated, we do have some models now in different states. We certainly have the Colorado model, and you cite your concern about an increase in traffic. Do you have a further breakdown in terms of those who had a prescription versus those who were otherwise ingesting not only marijuana, but any other drug?
I don't think that that's been seen, and I'm not aware of it specifically related to the possession of a recommendation. And it's not a prescription, by the way. It is a recommendation, which means, as a recommendation, it's a violation of federal law.
And Dr. Voth, and I'll submit this at some point, the study that, and this is by the Rocky Mountain HIDTA, you're familiar with?
High intensity drug trafficker, yeah.
They did find that there was an increase in traffic fatalities, but most of those in this finding were attributed to all drugs or other drugs. The increase to marijuana on page 7 of that report was minimal. At the same time, there was a national decrease as well. And I'll submit that. And let me ask you, you're a pain specialist, pain management specialist.
Internal medicine, addiction medicine, and pain. Yes, all three.
And for some of the concerns that were addressed in this committee, and for those who have sought THC, marijuana, what have you, in its natural state, would you find, or have you found in your practice something that you would consider to be equally, by way of a chemical compound or prescription, that you would think would address the concerns that certainly the parents of children who have seizures, or some of the seniors who have looked for some alleviation from pain? Is there, without necessarily a brand name, but is there some compound, or chemical compound, that you think would be less invasive to the human body than a natural substance like THC?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, you've mixed many situations together, and I treat a ton of pain of all different kinds. And I would tell you that among many of my young pain sufferers, marijuana use is very highly represented, and virtually all of them say that they use it to get stoned. And when I work through the legitimate prescription medications that are available, they do well with that. Now, relative to seizures, there's lots of seizure medicines on the market, and they do work. But for some of these extremely refractory cases, it's probable that cannabidiol is going to be something that will be helpful. But I want to know, as a treating physician, how much are they getting? What's the exact amount? What's the exact dose? What's the exact metabolism of that? And you do not get that with Charlotte's Web or the oils. So I think the research looking at cannabidiol is exciting. I think it's great. Investigational drug trials really need to look at that and study it, and I'm all for that. And there's no doubt for the seizure disorders. There's a refractory group that just are not responding to the medications that are on the market right now.
And marijuana, what is, in your opinion, I know that it is now legally prescribed. Of course, it's very expensive. I think it's averaging $24 a tablet or pill. Of course, but marijuana, for its treatment.
Marinol is not a wonder drug. I have used it in refractory pain cases as an adjunct. I do find that patients have some memory difficulties with it. They don't tend to get the stoned feeling that you would with marijuana. That's mainly because marijuana has a spike when it's smoked. Marinol doesn't. Some folks don't like that because it has a fairly long effect, but it has worked in the folks that I've tried it with.
And have you known or have you seen in your practice or your anecdotal evidence the effect, you mentioned children overeating gummy bears or cookies, don't let me misquote you, but have you seen or come across anyone being, I guess, not just to Marinol, but having some overdose to it, where there was some adverse reaction, or even death?
Oh yeah, there's death that is now documented in the literature, a fatal case. I've seen people that have, been, like I say, psychotic from it, which I guess you would list as a very severe adverse effect. Overdose is relative because, as you probably know, marijuana does not affect the brainstem the way alcohol and heroin do, so it doesn't suppress respiration, which is what typically kills people. However, there is now a case in the literature formally that marijuana was defined as the cause of death. Doesn't surprise me. Probably was because of an arrhythmia, which it can induce. Now, if you want to lump into that category the vehicular deaths, then that would be another clear cause of death. But as far as the direct taking the drug, that's a fairly rare phenomenon.
I'm just for the purpose, and I'll just give you one more question if I can, Madam Chair. I know we have other conferees, and I'm really, obviously, as a strong supporter of seeing, as 23 other states are having sane policy, and that if it's a popular vote or however you want to cause it, where there has been no direct death, and we certainly will be following up to see if there has been a death attributed to arrhythmia due to marijuana, but and something that's been used for 3,000 or 4,000 years. I guess, have you seen there to be, and you know the answer to this question, there to be overdosed by some of the chemical compounds or same prescription, now legal prescription chemical compounds that have been prescribed or authorized by you or by your colleagues?
You mean like Marinol?
No, the people.
Other medicines?
From chemical compounds.
Oh, absolutely they do.
And at a disproportionate rate from Marinol, from marijuana. This one case perhaps being the exception to the rule. And that's why I'm a little concerned when we look at a public health risk, which is what you said, and how serious or seriously a harm this drug is, and when it addresses, at least for some people, symptomatic pain.
Let me give you a parallel. If you came to my office for pain, and I said, let's go out the parking lot, and I want you to try this new drug, and it's this little substance X, a funny looking little white pill. And you say, well, gosh, what is it? And I say, well, it's got a lot of stuff in it. Well, how much do I take? Well, just take it till you feel better. Well, how much of that stuff is in it? And I go, well, some have a little of this and some have a little of that. It could vary maybe 10, 20, 30 times. If it's called OxyContin, and it's 5 milligrams versus 50 milligrams, you'd want to know what was in it. Same way with marijuana. If I prescribe by the FDA marijuana, you want to know that it's got X amount of milligrams or X amount of percentage in it. And that's one of the fundamental flaws in this whole idea that the street pot can be used medically that way. Second, You want to know that it came through a process. You want to know that what is in front of you is a drug that came through the FDA. Marijuana has it. Simple as that. And I think when you start to break precedent like that, you know, what if Californians stepped up and they said, we want Vioxx. We don't care if you pulled it off the market. Let's vote for it. Everybody gets whatever they want. Or everybody gets that funny little white pill of Dr. Voth that makes them feel so good. Well, you get enough people to vote for it, what do you get? You bypass the FDA, and you get medicine by popular vote. And that is a terrible precedent, despite the fact that all of these states have picked up the banner on that.
And despite the fact that no one's died, I don't think we'll get the same response to.
I did bring documentation of that. And again, I'm not arguing the death part of it, because I know, and we all know, that it doesn't suppress the brainstem, which is the big problem. But all the other problems are there for the culture to deal with.
I will say this in closing, Madam Chair, if you will allow him to respond. If you took me out to the parking lot and you offered me some small white pills and you told me that I could overdose and die from a disproportionate number, and then you took me out in the same parking lot and offered me something that some people said if I vote can alleviate the symptoms of the pain I'm having, but no one's ever died from it, even if you take too much, I'd probably do that. Let's go for the lab.
There are probably countries you could do that.
And this one soon, hopefully, will be.
Hopefully not.
Senator Kelly.
It's good to see you. I don't think you were here yesterday. Michelle was here, hoping that she had dinner.
I heard about it.
Okay, good. Because we heard some very compelling testimony yesterday, from parents, grandparents, of children who have severe epilepsy. I think it's called today.
Right.
I understand your argument about street pot being turned into medicine. I agree with you on that. Would there be some way, perhaps, that we could craft this bill? I mean, I'm thinking of another bill that's in the hopper here. I think it's called the right to choose or something like that, and it's right to try. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but essentially it would allow people to take drugs that had not been approved through the FDA when they were at a certain stage in life and everything else had been tried, nothing else worked, and so they would then be allowed to take this experimental drug. Do you think there's some way we could craft this legislation so that it was that narrow, where only in very certain cases where nothing else had ever worked, and I mean, you're not probably going to risk cognitive impairment. We've already got that. You know, there's a lot of the symptoms or concerns that you've expressed about the response to marijuana. It's already there. You know, it's over. We're beyond that. So, if there were a way that we could, or is there a way that we could craft this so that in those very specific cases, through the medical world and pharmaceutical world, we could address those issues?
Well, one of the great things going on, truly, is that we do now have several investigational new drug trials going on. So people that have this disorder can be brought into those trials. And the FDA set that up for just this very exact kind of phenomenon where there may be a drug that isn't completely through the process that might have benefit. The advantage of that, it's in a research environment, it's carefully medically supervised, it's not just willy-nilly out on the street. And I share your thought, and I even at one time thought, if you showed that there was someone end of life, you know, what the heck, why not try it? Well, the advocates are relentless, and I will tell you in states that have tried that, have tried to narrow the diagnoses down, within 2 or 3 years, it's wide open. And if you look at this bill alone, it essentially says any chronic disease. It starts with restrictive language, and then it just opens the door. And then you put huge restrictive problems on the state itself to come up with an infrastructure to say, okay, who's going to judge that? Is it a medical panel? Is it a nursing panel? Is it a lay panel? And then So you create this administrative nightmare to allow the drug, and yet you still, knocking on the door, have the advocates saying, well, me too. Why not MS? Why not chronic pain? Why not because I just don't feel good? And I've seen it happen in state after state, and I just feel like at this point, why don't we stick with the structure we have, which is the FDA, and does allow investigational new trials for exactly this type of thing, and those trials are going on, and people are doing research. I think when you open that door to say, why not, then you're breaking down the FDA and those controls.
Is there,
Yes, ma'am.
we'll carry on. Is the FDA doing any research, or anybody doing any research on marijuana specific to some of these diseases?
Absolutely. I mean, there are investigational new drug trials ongoing right now for this seizure disorder, yes. I think there's
know
two.
drug trials, but is that marijuana that they're
It's
testing, or some other?
No, it's the cannabinoids. It's the Charlotte's Web equivalent. That's going on in Colorado right now. I think there's at least 2 up there doing it. And last count, I think there were 3 to 5 that were actively working on the investigational new drug trials of cannabidiol, not just for other drugs, but of cannabidiol.
And no results yet?
Preliminaries out of Colorado were that roughly a third of the kids had some response. They were disappointed that it was not as robust as they had been alleged by the open use in the public.
Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to follow up on that piece, so those trials, are those part of a FDA approval process? I mean, is that the process they would go through kind of on their own, like most drugs would?
They certainly can. I mean, they certainly can. So if you find a substance that appears to be effective, then assuming there's a sponsor that says, okay, fine, we want to actually go on and produce it, then you go through phase 1, 2, and 3, etc. However, the investigational new drug trials can go on for a long, long time. There's several other ones. I mean, there's a lot of those out there, but there's several for cannabidiol specifically.
And so they are in a process, but none of them are very far along.
Right. But they are available.
Senator O'Donnell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Voth, can you just explain just a little bit about your background in regards to medical marijuana and also the Institute on Global Drug Policy?
Sure. The Institute on Global Drug Policy is based in Florida. I think we have 50 members now, some of the very top drug policy experts in the world. In fact, folks who have been the assistant directors of drug policy out of the White House National Office of Drug Control Policy, individuals, and I myself have advised the White House, numerous congressional offices, numerous international offices in other countries. I personally ran a chemical dependence unit when I entered practice for 10 years, and so I had the treatment side of it, I've had the prevention side of it, working with prevention organizations and consulting literally around the world in that regard. My drug policy work probably started in the mid-'80s when I spoke up and said we can't be legalizing pot because it's a problem. And so it's been very extensive. And that's been aside from my medical practice, which has of course been internal medicine, pain management, and addiction medicine. Hope that answers it.
Senator Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you tell us if there is any impediment to research as a result of state law?
That's an interesting claim, and I've asked that question. I've asked it at the FDA, I've asked it of researchers, I've asked it of the Mississippi Marijuana Farm, who actually is kind of the place that provides it. And every one of them uniformly says, if you come with a good research project, it will be approved. There is not an obstruction to that.
Any other questions? Dr. Senator Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good afternoon, Doctor. One thing we heard yesterday, especially from the silver-haired senior legislators, you mentioned Parkinson's disease is something I didn't hear you mention today. Do you have any thoughts on what you're talking about now, that the Parkinson's or even elderly at the end of their life, that's something, it was sad to see the children, but we also heard from the other side of that as well. You can share some of your thoughts.
Well, since I'm getting close to the silver-haired legislature, and I hope not that close to end of life, and having been in that position with many patients, including family members, you know, once again, if you take away cognitive abilities, that's a big part of dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., and that is one of the problems with marijuana. If they have pain, if they have other difficulties, you're trying to parse out those difficulties and treat them, not make them worse. That's one of the things that was found with MS, for instance. Parkinson's not studied. But MS, it was thought, well, yeah, it'll help spasm and all of this kind of stuff, and it turned out that it actually made gait worse and worsened the cognitive scores, so that they ended up having worse scores of dementia. So I hate to make dementia worse with more dementia. And I would hope that as a budding silver-haired legislator, I can get that point across to them. I guess that's a compliment, a budding silver-haired legislator.
Thank you. Dr. Voth, I'd kind of like to hear from a historical aspect why the FDA is necessary. Why do we have the FDA to begin with?
Well, going way back historically, think about the early days in the 20s and 30s when essentially we had opium compounds, Coca-Cola had cocaine in it. I mean, things like this where, you know, very serious drugs were just sort of scattered out in the public, and you had the snake oil salesman and nobody knew what was in any of this. So it was really an effort to try to get control in a systematic manner of what was coming out to the public. And thus, you know, as that whole thing unraveled, you had the Controlled Substances Act that tried to get tighter control of the more dangerous drugs, and then get control of how drugs would come through the FDA. And it's a very specific process. I mean, they have to be shown to be not only effective, but have reasonable side effects and be predictable and have dose ranges and know where toxicities are. I personally have conducted, as principal investigator, a number of drug trials, and they're very rigid about that. And they try to find those effective doses. So if you have an effective percentage of, say, like 1.3% THC for neuropathic pain, you don't want to turn around and say, well, sure, let's go have some hash oil, it's 80%, we'll fix all your neuropathic pain and see what happens too. I mean, that's just bad medicine. So trying to look at things from a medical standpoint, every single position from the medical organizations that have taken positions has voiced concern about that. All of them want to see the cannabinoids looked at, but they're all concerned about how this stuff gets to market and how it gets in front of the public.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a brief follow-up to your question, Madam Chair. How often does the FDA, Dr. Voth, have they approved natural substances? I mean, we have, this is no joke, my grandmother swore by sassafras to calm her nerves, and she'd grow her own. And I don't know if it was FDA approved, but it seemed to do it for her. And I don't know if she suffered any long time, but she lived to be 97, 98. How often does the FDA look at naturally occurring plants or other substances, maybe approve them for what people may be using already anyway, or have they?
I couldn't tell you how often, but I will tell you there is an herbal side to the FDA that looks at herbal preparations. It's been considered to look at marijuana in that side of the FDA, but since they've been able to pretty clearly define cannabidiol and delta-9 THC as sort of the ingredients, it's tended to stay over on the other side of the FDA. But there are herbal substances the FDA has approved. They generally don't cause intoxication, for the ones that I've been aware of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I may rebuild my ignorance that isn't opium, would that be considered a natural substance? Because that's...
Well, absolutely. I mean, opium is a good example as a naturally occurring substance, but then you've got morphine as a refined substance. And yes, there are problems with opiates being overdosed, etc. But to just give opium or let people smoke opium, which they did for years, is just not an appropriate way to take it.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm focusing on, because I keep hearing the term natural, but natural, well, I'll let
There's
you.
there's many natural substances that turn into medications. I mean, a perfect one for breast cancer is Taxol. It's from the yew tree bark, but yet we don't hand out yew tree bark and say chew on this much to treat your breast cancer. We refine it, we identify it, we turn it into a medication, and we give a specific dose. Foxglove plant for digoxin, same kind of thing. You don't chew 6 branches or 6 leaves. You don't chew it at all that way. I mean, it just vincristin from the vinca alkaloids. I mean, there's a lot of naturally occurring substances that are identified, purified. You figure out the effective doses and determine the medication.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, next we have Ed Klump.